Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to HeartBeat.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to HeartBeat this evening. This title of our show tonight is, Should Black Women Continue to Support the Democratic Party? Sounds a little controversial, doesn't it? We're going to be talking about this today because Black women are the backbone of democracy for this country. This country is depending on us to break our backs and to make sure that we help get people elected, Democrats elected into office. Black women consistently show up to fight for the common good for all of us. This world, by definition, is literally on fire. And all of this is a message that is telling us that we need to make major changes. How are we going to do this? We've got all these, money politics, identity politics, this polarization, a social division, racial tension, civil rights being taken away. The wealth gap is bigger than it's ever been. How are we going to actually deal with this? And because these issues have become so acute, more acute than ever, we are at a serious moment that we really need to talk this through. Let me invite in my regular commentators and co-hosts with me this evening. We're going to invite in Dr. Stephanie Coverson, Dr. Karen Johnson, Michelle Dotson, and Aaron Jones, all joining me this evening to have the discussion about the Democratic Party and what should we do next. Welcome to this conversation this evening, ladies. How are all of you this evening?
Wonderful. Thank you.
What did you think about when I pulled this topic together about how we should have this conversation about what's happening to us as Black women? I know we all exchanged, I have 22 items that we were exchanging a text message on what some of the issues that we all as Black women are dealing with and experiencing and what is not being solved. And so what are some of your thoughts about the moment that we are in right now? The fact that this is an acute moment. We don't have time to waste. There's a debate going on tonight on national TV with nobody a viable candidacy from the Republican Party. And then we have the Democrats who are continuing to not be able to deliver on the things that they have told us that they were going to deliver on. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of this. I'm going to start with you, Aaron Jones. What are your thoughts this evening about it?
So it's interesting. I was just talking with superintendents from across the nation. We were at Howard University this weekend speaking at the Urban Superintendents Conference, and I was mentioning to them the challenge that I have with the Democratic Party. Just in general, I could never vote Republican, but the Democratic Party always waits until the presidential campaign year to reach out to us, and then they lie dormant, and then we have to pull them out. I mean, we vote for Democrats more than anyone else, and our votes really matter, but they don't serve us well in the interims. They don't serve us well this year. They didn't serve us well last year. And so one of the things I was sharing, and I kind of would challenge any Democratic leadership listening, you have to stop just using us when it's a presidential election. And you have to be willing to invest. If diversity, equity, inclusion is really important to you, what you say it is, then you need to invest in us every year and not just when you need our votes.
Yes. Michelle, how are you this evening? I know you have a lot to say on this topic.
Oh, absolutely. I'm great. I want to say that I want to recognize that we've had historic legislation over the first 2 years, and I don't want to give that short shrift. At the same time, we've had historic retraction of laws that in my lifetime I never thought I'd see undone by unelected justices, a supermajority, a captured supermajority on the Supreme Court, and an executive branch unwilling to contemplate making a change when we know that that supermajority will be in place for the next generation.
Mhm.
So we've got two things happening, and a Republican Party that one of the most esteemed conservative justices who should be on that Supreme Court, Michael Luttig, has said is no longer a Republican Party. So that being said, we've seen voting rights, which is the key to every other right. I don't care if it's Roe versus Wade, affirmative action, LGBTQ rights, everything else. If you cannot cast a ballot, you can't legislate anything. And so voting rights are pivotal, and they are coming down faster than we can speak here or think tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And so without voting rights, nothing else can happen. And no one is talking about that forthrightly. So that's my thought. And we're not addressing that. We're getting happy talk about the things that are happening, but nothing about the things that are pivotal that are being taken away and how we're going to address it.
Mm-hmm. Let me read off a few of the things. We have this whole list of issues we were all talking about. I won't go through all of them but we do have voting rights on here. I call it kind of like the Black women demands, right? The whole issue around student debt relief, still not resolved. Do not hire list for these rogue police officers, still not resolved. I put in here the Karen Act, right? Like, I know that there's been some work to try to get some legislation passed to address the women that are calling in and creating turmoil and calling the police on Black people, Black men. And we need to deal with that whole issue too. And, some of my comments that for myself I wrote down is not just the Karen Act for them in Central Park, but also the Karen Act for the women that are inside of these organizations that are taking other women down. They should be held accountable for that sort of behavior. Pay equity, universal health care, free trade schools, credit score removals for housing. I mean, there's just so many issues that are out here for us to be able to, for our families to prosper. And now the divide is it's so huge, it's so significant. I don't know, 5 years ago, I wasn't using the term reparations, but here we are in 2023. We were holding on to one issue under President Biden, which is the student debt relief, and that has not passed. Dr. Coverson, what are some of your thoughts about some of this?
So I think what stands out for me is it feels like as Black women, we are the secret relationship for the Democratic Party. And what I mean by that is that, and I think the point has been made, that number one, there is an expectation that we do the grunt work. We get out there and we develop the racial coalitions, we're the doorbelling, all of these kinds of things. But then when it's time to show appreciation or, and I'm not even going to call it appreciation. Like, politics is about responding to your constituents.
Mhm.
So when it comes time to address the critical issues that are facing their constituents, it's all about wringing their hands. And we're so fearful because if we do this, then, other people are going to be mad at us, sort of thing. And so I struggle. Um, I absolutely would not vote for a Republican given their platform and, you know, n- just all the planks in the platform are rotten.
Mhm.
And I am beginning to more just openly articulate that sitting around the Democratic Party sitting around wringing their hands, instead of doing something to make our lives as their the backbone of their party. Like 93 to 95% of Black women vote for the Democratic Party. And
Mm.
so sitting around doing nothing to combat the fascism, the misogynoir, the anti-LGBTQ and trans legislation, the legislation that would support and make better lives for Black women, you're not doing anything. So, or you're not, I shouldn't say you're not doing anything. There is nothing substantial happening because we're wringing our hands, versus making broad, visionary steps
Mhm.
to make change, right? And so if you're not doing anything, substantial and sort of wanting to meet people in the middle, if the people on the right are basically off the cliff and down somewhere in the hellscape, where is their middle to meet?
Mhm. Dr. J, how are you this evening?
I'm great. How are you? I'm in transit, travel mode
I
today.
see that.
Doing well.
What is going through your mind that you would like to share about this moment and movement and all of what we've been discussing?
Quite a bit, quite a bit. I'm looking at this lovely purple. I don't know if everybody else can see it. And I'm reminded that red plus blue equals purple. And I'm thinking about the purple party for the people. Because when you're talking about should Black women, basically it's a question, what have you done for me lately?
Mhm.
Democratic Party. And I go back to in 1863, uh, it was written, henceforth now and forever shall be free. And that was because Lincoln couldn't run as a D. The D's didn't have him. So he had to run as a Republican. And I'll be back in the East Coast for the 60th anniversary or commemoration of the March on Washington for Equity and Jobs, where Dr. King again was reminding the nation that the promises made to Black people in general and poor people, all people, were not being fulfilled. And
Mhm.
I'm reminded that Michelle mentioned some key legislation that had occurred in the last 2 years. Well, I was thinking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and was reminded that it was Republican at the time in presidential history, whichever party ran the executive branch, the opposite party controlled Congress
Mhm.
until Bush. So it was the Republicans who actually pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Johnson had to go and get the votes of the Dixiecrats, which are today modern day Democrats. And what I be thinking about, Cindy and Queens, is perhaps in this moment, we particularly as Black women have an opportunity to think about, are we just going to loyally support a particular party, or are we really going to begin to start putting time and energy behind the candidate who puts people over party, we the people, and puts purpose over partisanship, because what's happening now just isn't working. And but what caught my attention is that the blacks in Wisconsin, black Republicans, are now all hands on deck, recruiting black people to join the Republican Party to begin to play what they refer to as the long game, to find out what the issues are of black Wisconsians, if that's what they're called, so that they can begin to start creating and crafting a party that deals with the needs of black people. So that's what I've been thinking about today.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Dr. J, because I know I personally heard last time when President Biden was running, there was a huge pushback from the Gen Z, millennials over that we need to have candidates that people can get behind, candidates who are actually going to fight for people. And I know that there's been a lot of work, with Bernie Sanders and the progressive movement that don't get a basis of support and who've been fighting their entire careers to try to do exactly what you're sharing and discussing. And so it is an interesting moment because we don't who's going to come forward on the Democratic platform. And I'm not turning on the TV tonight because I can't stand what's happening there, but who is that who are we going to have to choose from, or will we even have a choice? And our ancestors or many of our family would say, we fought for all of us to get out here and be able to vote, so why would we not vote? And so it's a very complex moment right now, because part of me personally just wants to abstain and say, let the chips fall, because the only way things will change is if we don't continue to repeat the same cycles. And yet it'll be us and our families that suffer the greatest if we don't vote.
If we don't, right.
Yes, Michelle?
So I'm reminded of when I'm so glad you said that. That's a great segue. It was Albert Einstein, who said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? A different outcome. And I'm reminded of 2016 and what people don't talk about. You know how I said I talked about happy talk? What people don't talk about, our power as Black women, as the backbone, as the voting bloc. And I'm watching it happen. And I know I'm paying very close attention to the horse trading that's happening. So our ability to wield power and steer this ship, our window of opportunity is moving this way. Okay. In 2016, what happened is we had an undervote, and it was concentrated in 3 states: Michigan, Florida, and Pennsylvania, and to some degree Georgia. And there was some horseplay that went on. There was definitely some horseplay that went on, but it was concentrated in 3, maybe 4 states. Black women undervote is really what lost Hillary the election. And people don't talk about it earnestly. There were 3 publications that documented it in a forthright way. But that's what happened. Some of it, like I said, was the finagling, the malfeasance and the finagling of the vote, of interference, let's say, of the vote. But some of it was us staying home because we decided we were not going to show up to the polls. If we do that in 2024, I can promise you that the margin between Biden and Trump, because it appears he will be the nominee, Trump will be the nominee, is so small that it could happen again. And if Trump wins, I dare say that, the definition of a failed coup is what? Practice for the next coup. And we see it happening right now. They're not going to do it the same way. They're not going to storm the Capitol like they did in 2021. It's these laws where it's raw power. It's what we saw in Ohio. It's all of these laws to jerry-rig the vote and gerrymander the vote and redistrict and take it to the Supreme Court, where in exercise of raw power, he won't leave office. He won't. And so we have to remember that if that happens, we're literally voting for democracy. So it's not an option, but the leverage we have is the leverage of basically saying, democracy depends on us, and here's what not what we need, it's what we command for our republic to function normally, so we're not putting democracy in the balance again. Because when Black women win, it's the very fact, think about the fact that we don't have a single Black woman governor. And in Washington State, it's a shame that we did not have a Black woman in the pipeline, because this is a progressive state, a triple blue state, and we didn't have a Black woman in the pipeline to succeed Jay Inslee.
Well, the pattern of that, Michelle, excuse me for interrupting, the pattern of, first off, not having Black women in pipeline, yes, that is spot on, that we don't develop succession for any of our elected officials. We all watch what happens to, we have one sitting here on the show. Actually, we have, between Dr. J and what Erin went through with her candidacy, I'm just going to keep myself out of it for purpose of this discussion. The three of us here have actually experienced not having any basis of support from the party that says that they believe in equity and wants to move us forward. And so you can't have equity without doing something disproportionately advantageous to the underrepresented people. And you can't keep repeating the same pattern of the process of wait your turn and all the things that come along with this to be able to accelerate it. Now, when we get appointed, right, the way into these political seats, that the white folks are coming in through is the appointment process. But then look what happens when even the governor appoints somebody in. You barely get them. They start with no money in their budget, and they get fired for underspending their budgets. This is the chaos of these leaders, or quote unquote leaders, who believe that they understand how to lead when in fact they're destroying this party by their arrogance of believing that they know what's best. They just want pawns. Like, we can't continue down this cycle. And here we are. Will Joe Biden even make it? I don't mean this disrespectfully. I don't mean it from a harmful perspective, but what happens if he doesn't make it to the election? We've got a pool of 80-year-olds. What will happen to the vice president if she's on the ticket? We are watching Fani Willis. We're watching what's happening every single time a Black woman gets in a position of power. It's T-minus 20 seconds before the launches are coming out after her.
I have two words.
Yes.
Stacy Abrams.
Oh, I have two more words. Sherry Beasley, Val Demings.
So particularly, I just want to talk about, yes to everyone else, but I want to talk about Stacy Abrams, who did not get the might, the wallet, the machine of the Democratic Party. And so Stacy Abrams, in her book, she talks about not only do we lack the resources, women and people of color are typically viewed as beggars at the table, not the bankers behind the desk. This
Mhm.
Yep.
perception means that even when we are primed for access, our engagement with money is met with suspicion and false impediments.
Mhm.
And so, again, it is fine for us to mobilize on the street and bring souls to the polls and sort of do sort of the boots and people on the ground. But instead of investing in us,
Mhm.
fighting for us, calling out our names in spaces where we don't have access, it is the continuation of the same old, same old. It
Mhm.
is also important to note that the Republican Party's strategies to take over the Supreme Court, to overturn Roe v. Wade, to
Mhm.
claw back voting rights has been a standing strategy for 50 years.
Mhm.
Yes.
It's never been a secret. And
Mhm.
so
No.
again, we have a party that is wringing their hands and not taking bold visionary action because they don't want to offend, and
Mhm.
who they do not want to offend is not their largest voting block,
Right.
right? I actually take umbrage with putting Hillary Clinton's loss. I mean, the data is the data, and Black women stayed home. So I'm not disputing that. What I am taking umbrage with is the sense of entitlement that we need to show up and continue to vote and put our names and kids and gas money and however else, we're doorbelling and trying to
Mhm.
get people to vote. Like, earn my vote. Like, you work to earn everybody else's vote. And so if you are not going to earn our vote, then don't expect for us to turn out for you. And so I am concerned about democracy and the republic and all of these things. And unfortunately, it seems to be the canaries in the coal mine, i.e., Black
Mm-hmm.
women, who tend to be the most concerned,
Mhm.
right? Because there were a whole bunch of white women that sat home
Mhm.
or
Mm-hmm.
decided to align themselves with their whiteness instead of, not being grabbed in their genitalia. So they did not align with their womanhood. They decided to align with their whiteness.
Mhm.
And so there's not a lot of, I don't feel like there's a lot of conversation around that, particularly because in whiteness, you get to be an individual,
Mhm.
right? And when we are talking about being Black or other persons of color, we are a group and we are expected to move accordingly. And I
Mhm.
think that's this
Mm-hmm.
continuum of problematic behavior by the Democratic Party, and then they come back and threaten and wring their hands about, oh, your civil rights are going to go backwards if you don't come out and vote for us. What are you going to do when we're voted for? Like, when we vote for you,
Mhm.
Republicans are still, doing what they're doing, and there's a difficulty in actually, again, pack the court. Find an administrative way to undo
Mhm.
student loan debt.
Mhm.
There are a bazillion fulfillion laws on the books right now that are not enforced.
Mhm.
They haven't been
Because
revoked. They're not
because
enforced. Stop
and
taking my student loan. Stop taking
and
my student loan payment. Just don't enforce the law if you can't get something different passed.
and
I've
to,
got another one for you. You're touting the Inflation Reduction Act that you named after Joe Manchin, who's now questioning whether or not he should be a Democrat, and all of the benefits are going to Republican states. You're out here touting it and the benefits are mostly going to Republican states. How does that help us who showed up for you in a pandemic, put our lives on the line when there wasn't even a vaccine yet, by 7 million plus votes? How does that help us? So what I'm saying is, our vote should cost you, while we're clawing back rights on that Supreme Court, those unelected legislators, while we're clawing back rights, that we're not asking for things that don't belong to us. We came over here, our ancestors came as the enslaved people. They worked for free as chattel slaves. In no other nation did that happen. We're asking for what belongs to us. So I will tell you, what you owe us are reparations.
Absolutely.
And I never would have said
Past
that
due.
until this year.
Yeah, I think we're all, I want to bring Erin in here too, because I'm reading her face. I agree. I think none of us were ever talking about the reparations piece to it, but the multiple billions of dollars of disparity between the white people in our country and Black and Indigenous people. It's so many billions. You can't fix it by giving us a 25-cent raise every year, right? Like, Erin, what's running through your spirit right now?
So a couple things. So when it comes to reparations, I think we often think about, well, as I'm seeing on TikTok and social media, people talk about reparations. It's always, those bad white people need to repair the harm. But and as bad people, we often think about Republicans and conservative people. But I think one way that Democrats could do reparations is by investing in Black women in local races. I mean, I think a place to start with this. I think sometimes we think so big. And I'm thinking more as I look at this national scene and having run for statewide office here in the state of Washington, I think we need to be investing more time locally in Black women who are running at the local levels and really build a movement of, which I think in our state, we've done a pretty good job. Just exponentially, we've increased the number of Black people who are in our state government. And I think we need to keep doing that, but roll that across the nation. And I think reparations doesn't have to be, it has to be really creative. And I think one way that the Democratic Party should pay reparations is by financially investing in Black women and Black men who are running for office. And as those of us who have run know, like, that raising of money is such an incredible barrier. Now, I raised more money than my opponent who won, which is unique. But most Black women don't raise a lot of money because we're not trusted with money. And I invested so much time that I could have been out with people on the phone raising money, which I think really the Democratic Party, if it's serious about equity, should be investing in the finance part of this deal. We know what we're talking about. We know our lived experience. We are experts in that. What they need to be doing is investing in the places where we're not expert, where we don't have the connections, we don't have the networks. And I think, as someone who was raised up by the then Speaker of the House in 2012, brought me to an event with, I think, 10 other people of color and said, you need to run. That's what put the idea in my head to run back in 2012. And then 4 years later, that person didn't even support me in my own campaign. We got to call those things out, right? And hold people's feet to the fire. But I think we've got to start locally. And so I would encourage anybody who is on this call here from Washington State, but anyone anywhere else, we have to be paying attention to who are the Black people that are running locally and how could we invest in them and really raise up an army of people.
And a whole nother thing I want to add before Dr. J, I'm going to want to get your thoughts on that too. One other thing we need to pay attention to, well, two things. Number one, I don't know if they're the largest, but there is a fairly large fundraising organization here in Washington State that gets a lot of these major campaigns. And there is not one Black person on that staff. And many of our elected officials are using that agency to help them fundraise. And so We did have some smaller firms. I don't know if they're still at play or not. You guys may know more about that than I do, but I think that's atrocious all in itself. And the Democrats should be putting money behind standing up, political fundraisers and people who can actually help raise money and get Black people elected. Dr. J, what were you thinking as Aaron was talking? I saw your head.
As Erin was talking, I was thinking she was spot on, and that pretty much was the advice I gave to the person who was heading the Democratic Party when they reached out to the Office of Equity. I was in that role to get my thoughts on how to achieve equity in elected officials, like reach out to the Black people. As a matter of fact, I asked them to go talk to you, Cindi Bright, spoke with Tina. But as Erin was talking, see, what Erin did not say though is, yes, she said she raised more money than her opponent and lost, but that was because of the character assassination that was taken out against Erin when it looked like she was going to win. And what I've heard Michelle talking about is was pay attention to the laws. Dr. Curtis has been talking about the hand wringing, and see, one of the books that I'm writing is entitled "Not Red, Not Blue, It's White." Because when we think about the hand wringing, when we think about coming out, as Aaron said earlier, to covet our vote when it's time to vote, what we're really talking about is complicity, which results in status quo and making sure things remain the same. Case in point, if the as a matter of fact, I almost clapped when I heard that the Republicans in Georgia anticipated what was going to happen. So as good chess players, what they did was wrote a law that gave themselves the power to remove a prosecuting attorney in 2025. Then they went ahead and said, oh, no, we can't wait that long. Oh, it's 2026. Oh, we need to move this to this October to put that in play. And I thought, you know what? I need to just stand up and just give credit where credit was due, because that was a masterful play. And my question was, well, God, where are the Democrats who are in power? How are they using their authority to counteract all the voter suppression? Are we really looking for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? Or are they really Dixiecrats? Or is this not about any of that and about not red, not blue, yet white? That's what I was saying.
That is a powerful point, because I think Stephanie or Dr. Coverson also made a comment about it. There's the strategic lens that the Republicans have. They're looking several years down the line. Now, maybe the Dems are, but we don't see it. And the other thing is, I've said this, that where we are right now is we're in a street fight. Like, this is not every day as usual. And when there's a street fight, we got to go into Aunt Viv mode and start taking people out, but we don't have the backing of the Democrats to help us do that. They want to, I love Michelle Obama. They like, when they go low, we get high. And we're all like pulling our earrings off. Like, no, we're not. We are
already off.
All right, we got to fight for this. And so, from my perspective, the only folks that know how to fight are us Black women, because our lives have been so impacted by all of this mess. And we've continued to be there for every single human being in society. Common good is what we're fighting for. Common good is what we're fighting for.
I think the problem is, onto your analogy of the street fight. So the Republican Party is out in front in the street, ready for a street fight. And I think the Democratic Party is thinking that they're prepared for mediation, right? And those are two different conflict resolution strategies, right? And so, but the problem is the Republican Party has sent them text messages like, I'm gonna beat your ass at 3:00 when we get out of class. Drop notes in the locker. Like, it hasn't been a surprise. And so, but the problem is, and don't mind me, I may not know anything with a master's degree in political science. I may know nothing. But what I do know is back when I was in school for my political science degree, we were still talking about the planks of the Republican Party and conservatism,
Mhm.
right? And some of these things that we are seeing come to fruition, I learned about back in, the early 90s.
Mhm.
So it
Right.
hasn't been a secret. And so the question is, again, back to this hand wringing, we don't want to do something that is, too out of the box, too thoughtful thinking. Why are we, the Donald Trump administration stole 3 Supreme Court appointments and nominations. And they're not following the rules, and even sort of those what gentle people's rules, gentlemen rules, I think they're called. And so why are you continuing to adhere towards
Mhm.
rules that are being violated at
Mhm.
every step?
Mhm.
Match energy. If
Mhm.
you want to be elected,
Mhm.
match energy and come up with solutions to issues and situations that are life altering for your constituents.
Mhm. You know, Dr. Coverson, to your points on some of that, I'm going to go bring us back to local politics for a moment here in Washington State, because what I have continued to observe is, I'm trying to be respectful how I describe it, but a lot of the people who are in those PCO roles, or the precinct committee officer roles, who have power to advance candidates, um, have folks in these roles that I would just say are just kind of not, they're prohibiting people from moving forward. And they themselves, what they're calling candidates out and saying, she's not ready, it's not her turn. And the actual person who's speaking isn't even qualified to say that. But we don't have a filter or a lens for how we get people into those roles who have a lot of power. Like, I think people underestimate the power is not just, the people in the Senate. It's the people who are controlling who's coming off the floor, who's getting endorsements, who's considered a worthy candidate. What does qualified actually mean? And why are we actually allowing people who aren't qualified to vote in and say, she can't do this now? I've watched it over and over again happen, and we've lost great BIPOC candidates because some mediocre guy stood up and said, she's not ready yet. How can we even change the local issues when it's up for grabs on who becomes a PCO? That's
And
kind of an entry level role, but it's a powerful role in a
and
legislative district.
and let me add to that. So we have a minority majority district. What is that? Legislative District 38. And so the machinations that happen in that that PCO space, where there, even though it's called a majority minority district, it is actually a minority, um, majority district, right? So, and what I mean by that is the machinations, when folks of color were recruited. And I used to live in that district. When folks of color were recruited into that district, the machinations, the games, the moving goalposts to disrupt BIPOC folks from participating, from being in leadership roles. Um, it it was extremely problematic and
Mhm.
frankly a turnoff.
Mhm.
Right? So you're like, I have to, be deemed incompetent and be suspect, and and at that time get a paycheck. Like, I have to deal
Right.
with that at work. I am not going to come and volunteer my time
Right.
and deal with that for free.
Right.
And so this continuation of uh, uh, BIPOC folks, particularly Black women, are iced out of these leadership roles and not listened to. Something bad happens. Oh, we should have listened to Black women. Black women come back. Okay, here we are, not going to listen. Something bad happens. Oh no, we should have listened to Black women. Rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat.
Yes.
I also want to offer, so when it comes to PCOs, and I led the African-American Caucus for 4 years after I lost my election. It was my way to invest in the Democratic Party, and after 4 years I said they don't deserve my time anymore. And here's one of the things that I said, because I attended those meetings in every legislative district across the state of Washington. And one of the things I said to folks in leadership is, if you say you want more people of color to show up at these meetings, but these meetings often have no agenda. They often are wasting people's time talking about frivolous things and going through parliamentary procedures. It's just silly. And we have stuff that we need to do. So I said, until you change the system by which you are running your meetings, you actually don't deserve us there.
Right.
That's
And
real talk.
What do you
Real
get?
talk.
Two
Absolutely.
minutes to speak? When you're allowed to, they give you 60 seconds or 2 minutes. And so I remember my first event that I went to, I didn't know that there was these rules around 2 minutes, and I was just being cut off and interrupted. And I start to get a sense on how nasty is what you're describing, Erin, how nasty this process is. Michelle, you're actually a PCO, correct?
But you see how silent I am? Like the wall has already gone up. Because I have, you know my saying for this, Cindi. We're not broken. The system is broken. That's why there's no Black women governors. That's why there's no Black women in the U.S. Senate. We are not broken. The system is broken. And until we exert leverage on the proper fulcrum to fix the system, it will not be resolved. Like,
so how do we do that? Like, that's the whole title. Like, what do we do? Because we're living in this broken system. And when people have tried it in the past to create another party, or, the labels that get attached to, like, what is it that we do?
I want to throw out one other thing too. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
No. Go ahead, Erin. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say another thing that is really true, and I experienced this, and Dr. J kind of alluded to this. So one of the trainings I did today for Puget Sound Energy, I talked about the difference between belonging and not belonging. Belonging is, if you listen to Brene Brown, not belonging is actually not being ostracized. Not belonging is fitting in, contorting yourself to become like whatever the people are around you. And here's where this shows up for me. At least in Washington State, I can't speak for other states because I didn't run for office in other states. But here's what I will say about running for office in the state of Washington, is there is an assumption that even though I come in brown skin and I come with a lived experience, I am supposed to contort myself to become like a white person running as a Democrat. And the reality is that my lived experience, my faith background, all of those are part of the Black experience. They're uniquely, you live anywhere else in the country, Black folks, Black women have a faith practice. But here in Washington State, that is seen as, whoa, you can't be a Christian and run for as a Democrat. But again, it was the need to contort and make yourself into. So what y'all want is white people with brown skin. What you really want is the white experience, and you want white culture. And here's the thing, I was raised by 2 white people, and yet, so I know how to play the game if I want to. I refuse to play that game because that doesn't serve the people who look like me. It doesn't serve my lived experience. And I recognized that right away. Soon, it wasn't too long before I realized, oh my gosh, y'all just want me to be the white lady with brown skin so you can say, check the box, we got our brown person. But my lived experience is actually not valuable to you. You want me to just parrot the needs of your community.
I appreciate you bringing up particularly the faith aspect to this, because most of the foundation of who we are as people, who we are as Black women, is what gets reported and what gets investigated about us, and it's characterized, to your point, Aaron, as not appropriate for the workplace and not, we can't even. I know Dr. J can relate to this because, we can't show up as our authentic selves. We can't put our music on. We can't say God. We can't, none of that. And yet, the whole dominant culture does absolutely nothing to accommodate our lives. And so we sit here on the daily, to your point about the contortion, trying to be, refusing to be, but they're expecting us to try to be someone we aren't. And so, even running for a political seat, when we come forward, I'll never forget it in my district about a brown woman who was running, successful businesswoman, was ousted because a mediocre guy, mediocre white man, stood up, a man who, no, let me not say that, stood up and said she's not ready yet, and got the rest of the PCOs to vote her out. She's incredibly successful on the East Side. And to watch that happen, and there's no recourse for it. We lose our jobs. We get labeled. We get the behind the scenes narrative. What was the term one of you guys used? Oops, one of you ladies used. Dr. J, I got to write another $1 into the 10 for using you guys. How do we transform this society in enough time before this next election so that we can have these positions of power, so that we can get Black women elected into seats? That's all coming up this next year. How do we do that when we don't have a basis of support? And the equity officer we had that we could go to for the last few years is now sitting on HeartBeat with us every week, trying to, being a thought leader in this. But do we have any basis of support?
I would like to respond. I'm not quite sure if it could be, well, it's going to be accomplished before 2024, then that would require prayer.
Yes.
But I really want to go back, just step back and pause and see law. Because again, it's not red or blue, it's white. When I was listening to Aaron, I was reminded that my dad gave me a copy of a book entitled Robert's Rules of Order when I was in high school for a birthday gift. And I'm like, what? First of all, what? Now, granted, I enjoyed reading, so I was glad to get a book. But I understood why. Once I started reading it, I was prepared. And see, this conversation we're having right here sounds an awful lot like the conversations that you queens have had weeks ago about employment, equity in employment, and standards and norms. And the question is, who wrote the standard? Who wrote the norm? And the question that you asked is, what do we have? What is our opportunity now in this moment? Might very well be to start writing, showing up, making sure that our children know what a page is, dragging them to church and to city council meetings early. Doing what we can do for the long game, while doing things like demanding, okay, Democratic Party, you want our vote? Then we want to put Aaron's suggestion into play. We want to make sure that every single Black child from kindergarten through 6th grade is a page, or whatever it is, to start dealing with systemic change, well, as well as even beginning to start looking at, why are we doing things the way that we're doing? That, who is that advantaging? And if we really are going to be an anti-racist, multicultural, intergenerational, democratic society in this republic that we call America, where there's liberty and justice for all, for we the people, well, let's reimagine what that looks like and be about the business of getting it done.
I wonder if, I saw the email that came out today about the Equity Summit. I heard that there was a predictable outcome in the new chief equity officer for the state of Washington. And I wonder if, we show up, and I wonder if we start to push the envelope around, hypothetically, I'm just throwing a thought out there, but here in the state of Washington, we have 7%, I believe it is 7 or 8% Black population. Maybe we demand that 7 or 8% of the total operating budget for the state of Washington go into A, B, and C, right? Maybe it's into healthcare, or it's into, whatever that is. Maybe we start into our small businesses. GDP spend on Black business in the state of Washington in 2021 was $1.2 billion. In a state that has a 6% population, that number should be closer to $22 billion. So we have a $20 billion deficit just on spending of our businesses. These loans and these grants that are coming out from the state of Washington that are, I saw in the last couple of weeks, can't remember the number exactly. There was a racism grant that came out of King County. They had $25 million allocated, and the amount of money that was asked for was $283 million from Black businesses. Maybe we start demanding that this money start to get funneled into us. And maybe now, since, we have a new person in that role, let's take out the talking points of which you were terminated, Dr. J, and let's start holding that person accountable to deliver against, our demands as Black women here in Washington state, and that this money come into us. Like, we can't solve it by $25 million input when $283 million is what's being asked for. It's never going to work. It's the corporate, what Dr. Coverson and I were talking about one time, which is the salary structure is moving 5% a year, and you're getting a 2% raise, and you're already 20% below market. You can't fix it that way. So the numbers don't work. Yes, Dr.
Two
J?
things.
Mm-hmm.
Two things. One, in terms of the demographic, unless science has changed, or they've changed, moved the goalpost again, one drop of Black blood last century equaled Black. And so anybody who's 2 or 3 or more races, chances are they have a drop of Black blood in them. So that number goes from 6% higher. Point
Yes.
number one. Point number two, it's also going to be very important to build caucuses and coalitions with all people who want the best for all people. And there are Black Africans who are now coming together, who are being treated as Black American descendants of people who were enslaved. So they thought there's a difference between colonization and slavery. We'll have that conversation later.
Yes.
But they're now being treated like Black American descendants of people who were enslaved and don't have a culture of voting. And so they now are coming together to start to vote and make demands, just like we're talking about here. So maybe it's also time to begin to connect with them and begin to see what we can do together as well.
Mm-hmm. Final thoughts, ladies. The fastest hour of the day. We could talk about this all day because this impacts our lives every single day. Michelle, what are your final thoughts for tonight? And this conversation is going to continue regularly. So, Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, I think this has to extend beyond business into housing, into education, because we have to be thinking about our progeny and passing the baton, and the attacks on public education and what's happening there, and universal health care, because we can't walk around with this 50-pound backpack on our backs and then pass that on to our children and expect that, just one catastrophic event and everything, the whole universe collapses on them. And then on a national level, I love the commemoration of what's happening in DC at the end of this month, but I feel like we're celebrating ghosts. There is no voting. We have Section 2 left.
Right.
Affirmative action is gone. They're attacking EEOC and civil rights. So I feel like that what's happening at the end of the month, instead of commemorating, we should be mobilizing. That's why I'm not going. We should be mobilizing to talk about what's next. I mean, there is the the daughters of the Confederacy. I mean, we should be giving people history. The reason why these people are acting so crazy, the moms of liberty, is because they're still trying to put together the Constitution of the Confederacy. They
Yep.
still think
Right.
they're resurrecting the fact that they think they shouldn't have lost the Civil War. So
Right.
we should be
Right.
mobilizing to
Right.
basically put our rights back together. And that's what I mean by reparations. We come up with a number, you got to meet the number, because every time we give them new rights we want, they're going to figure out how we don't deserve it and how to take it away. But if we give them a number, the reason why they don't want to give us reparations, because they say it'll bankrupt the country. And then if they give it to us, they're going to have to give it to the Chinese, because remember, they sent the Chinese away at one point. They're going to have to give it. They're going to have to give reparations to the indigenous people, the blood quantum, the tribal nations. They're going to have to. There's going to be a whole lot of people that want reparations, and rightfully so. And if it bankrupts the country, oh well. But give them the number.
Yes.
And then let them figure it out. And then we can negotiate from there. But we need to change the whole deal.
Thank you, Michelle. Aaron, final thoughts.
Just, I want to say again, I want to focus on local races. So one of the things that I realized running for statewide office is people do not pay attention to even the statewide offices other than governor. And we need to pay attention to those races and the down ballot races in school. As an educator, pay attention to your school boards, because that is where the Republican Party is raising up potential candidates for the future. We need to be raising up candidates in that place too. And so please, please, please pay attention, because that will influence how the children are raised as well.
Yes, we'll be talking more about that at future shows. Aaron, thank you. Dr. Coverson.
I have way too many thoughts, but I, given sort of the commemoration of the March on Washington, I just want to leave this unpopular quote from MLK. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in this stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. So this is a continuous narrative and theme, A. And B, I think that it's important for us to be active, involved, not only just vote, but hold these folks accountable. And I think, again, back to the Republican Party out in their street fights, right? So, what is a Republican representative's worst fear? Getting primaried. And so maybe it's time for us to start primarying these Democratic folks that are supposed to be representing us, but are very satisfied and complacent with the status quo. And, their status quo of receiving their paycheck, their benefits, their pension, their retirement, while we continue to be left behind, chasing after goalposts that keep moving outward, away from our attainment. The last thing that I will say, Citibank hired a whole bunch of economists to talk about the costs of racism, particularly anti-Black racism. And the United States lost $16 trillion in gross domestic product, so GDP, over, I believe it was a decade. And so that is not talking about the money that was robbed out of our pockets. That is all the non-Black people and the white identifying people too. Racism costs us all. And
Yes.
so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Covison. Last but not least, Dr. J.
And because racism costs us and harms us all, it is time to plot, to plan, to mobilize, strategize, and organize. And I'm reminded that the United States had no problem with their Marshall Plan when they rebuilt the nations that they destroyed during the World War II. So we could do what we want to do. Furthermore, the people, the benefactors of the 40 acres with a mule were not the Black people to whom it was promised. It was the white slave holders, to be clear.
Yeah.
And I, you know, and the Washington State, Eddie Rye and Hayward Evans and Dr. Tracy Harrell and many pastors are getting together this weekend to do not a commemoration, but a continuation, to get to your point, Michelle. And they will be talking about what legislation do we need in Washington State to begin to ensure equity and justice for all. And finally, I would just invite everyone to join me in thinking about how you're going to show up in this moment. I'm reminded of Fannie Lou Hamer, who in the 1968 Democrat Convention, I mean, Fannie Lou Hamer was a pioneer, gave her all her best to the Democratic Party and was treated less than a child of God. And I'm like, it has really been bothering me. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to study everything she said, she wrote, and go back. A Sankofa. A Sankofa is an African word when you go backwards in history to get something from the past that you're going to need moving forward. And that's going to be my Sankofa moment. Fannie Lou Hamer, what's your Sankofa moment? So that you can also be part of not the commemoration, but the continuation of equity and justice for all.
Yes.
And if all else fails, like Shirley Chisholm said, if they won't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
Bring a folding chair. Come on now.
A figurative and a literal one. No, I kid.
Unbought and unbossed.
Unbought, that's right. Look, again, great conversation tonight. Thank you to all of you. Dr. J, Dr. Coverson, Aaron, and Michelle for being here every week and showing up. This is an important, necessary, ongoing conversation where we will not let up talking about this. Our lives are at stake. And to the viewers who are joining us, I see a lot of your regular names here every week. Thank you so much for being here and supporting this movement. Please share, tag, get these messages out across the country, what we're talking about. Our lives depend on it. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good week, everyone.
Half that up in Saks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yo.